Picture the road just before dark. You're in the back seat, and the summer air is coming through the window, warm and heavy, smelling like cut grass and gasoline, and something sweet drifting from up ahead. Your father slows the car. And there it is, rising out of a flat field at the edge of town, taller than anything around it. A great white wall, standing against a purple sky. The drive-in screen, bigger than your house, bigger than your school. And below it, already, the rows of cars are filling in, headlights sweeping across the gravel, families settling in for the night. You remember this. Maybe you can't say why it comes back so clearly, but you remember the feeling of pulling in, of finding your row, of the whole evening still ahead of you, under an open sky. That was the drive-in. And for a lot of us, it was where the best nights of being young actually happened. Tonight, we're counting down 25 things that made a night at the drive-in feel like magic. 25 things that have quietly vanished from American life. Some of them you'll remember the second you hear them. Some you may have forgotten you ever knew. And a few are worth waiting for. Keep an eye out for number 7. It's the one thing everybody who ever went to a drive-in can still feel in their hands, cold and metal, the moment they close their eyes. Number 6 is the tender one, the one about the kids in the back seat, and it may be the reason your own parents loved these nights as much as you did. And one of the very last things on this list is something that today is almost always just an empty lot with weeds coming up through the gravel. A piece of ground that used to hold 1,000 summer nights. Because here's the thing, nobody ever declared the drive-in dead. There was no last night, no big goodbye. Color television came into the living room. Then the videotape machine came after it. And the land those big fields sat on got too valuable to leave sitting under a movie screen. One by one, quietly, the screens went dark. And a whole way of being together, out in the warm dark, under the real stars, went with them. We're going to bring some of it back tonight. So before we pull into the first row, do one thing for me. Tap that subscribe button. This channel is for people who remember. And the more of us there are, the louder we remember together. Now let's find our spot. Number 25. The ticket booth that charged by the car, not by the head. You remember rolling up to that little booth at the entrance. The man leaning out of a lit-up window, barely big enough to hold him. And the price wasn't per person, it was per car. One flat price, and everybody inside came along for it. Your father would hand over a few dollars, and that was the whole family in. Mom, Dad, 3 kids, and whoever from down the street had piled in too. There's a reason folks remember this so fondly, and it isn't just the money. It was the feeling of getting away with something. Kids would duck down in the back seat, or climb into the trunk before the gate, and everybody knew it, and mostly everybody let it slide. The drive-in was built to be generous. The whole business model said, bring everyone, the more the better, and that changed everything about who got to go. A family that could never have afforded 5 separate movie tickets could afford 1 carpool. So the drive-in filled up with people the indoor theater priced right out. The big families, the tight budget families, the ones who counted quarters. For 1 flat fee, all of you got a night out under the stars. You don't see that anymore. Somewhere along the way, everything got charged by the head, scanned 1 ticket at a time. The idea that a whole family could be 1 price, 1 carful, 1 shared night, that quietly disappeared. It was never really about the dollar. It was about the door being wide open to all of you at once. Number 24. The dirt ramps that tilted your car up toward the screen. Here's one you might have forgotten you ever knew, until right now. The ground at a drive-in was never flat. Each row of cars sat on a long, low mound of packed earth. A ramp, they called it. So that when you pulled your front tires up onto it, the nose of the car lifted, and suddenly, you and everybody in the front seat were looking up and level with that giant screen. By some accounts, getting those ramps just right was a real craft. Build them too steep, and the folks behind you couldn't see over your roof. Too shallow, and you were staring at the back of somebody's station wagon all night. Somebody had walked that field with a grader and a good eye and shaped the whole lot so that every single car got a clean look at the picture. And you felt it when you pulled up. That little lurch, as the front wheels climbed the mound, the car settling back on its haunches. everybody leaning back into the seats. It was the small physical signal that the night had officially begun. You were parked. You were pointed at the sky. The movie was coming. Those ramps disappeared with the drive-ins that were built on them, of course, but even the ones that hung on paved over the earth, or let it wash flat, and the tilt was gone. It seems like such a small thing, a mound of dirt, but it was the whole reason a field full of cars could all watch one screen at once. Somebody shaped the ground itself, so you'd have a good view. That's the kind of care that used to be built right into the dirt. Number 23. Tuning the movie in on your car's AM radio. If you went to the drive-in later on, in the newer years, you remember this one.
Instead of the old speaker on the window, a little sign by the screen would tell you a number, turn your dial here, and you'd reach down and roll your car radio across the band until, all at once, the movie's voices came pouring out of your own dashboard speakers, filling the whole car in sound.
This was a clever fix, and folks were genuinely amazed by it at first. Your own radio, the one you listened to on the drive over, was suddenly the voice of the movie. The sound was clearer than the old metal speakers had ever been, richer, fuller, coming from all around you, instead of one tinny box hooked to the glass. And there was something cozy about it. The whole family sealed inside the warm car, windows up on a cool night, the film playing through the same speakers that played your songs on the way there. You could turn it up loud. You could feel it. But every rose has its thorn, and this one had a famous one. Leave that radio on too long with the engine off, and you'd drain the battery flat. All across America, on countless summer nights, the movie would end, and somewhere in the dark a car wouldn't start, and a good neighbor 2 rows over would come rolling up with jumper cables. It happened so often it was practically part of the show. The radio sound was better, but it was also the beginning of the end for something. The little speaker that had hung on your window for 30 years. We'll get to that one. It's higher on this list than you'd think. Number 22. Smuggling your own food in the trunk to save a little money. Here's a memory that'll make you smile. Before you ever left the house, there was a quiet operation going on in the kitchen. Mom would pop a big batch of popcorn on the stove and pour it into a paper grocery sack. A cooler got packed with bottles of pop, maybe some sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a few cold pieces of last night's chicken, and all of it went into the trunk, out of sight, before you ever pulled up to that ticket booth. Everybody did it, and the drive-in mostly knew, and it became its own little tradition. The snack bar prices were how the theater made its real money. The movie was practically the bait to get you in front of the food. So bringing your own was a small, harmless act of thrift, the kind of corner cutting that a family on a budget was proud of, not ashamed of. And there was a warmth to it. The food from home tasted like home. Your mother's popcorn, salted the way your family liked it. The pop, your father let you drink straight from the bottle, because tonight, the rules were a little looser. You'd eat in the dark, with the movie glowing on the windshield, passing the sack around the car, and it felt like a picnic that happened to have a giant movie attached. Now, plenty of folks still bought from the snack bar too. We'll get to that, because that walk was its own kind of magic. But the trunk full of homemade treats was how a family stretched $1 and still gave the kids a night to remember. It was thrift and love in the same paper sack. Nobody called it going out to eat, but somehow, eating your own popcorn in the back seat under the stars was one of the best meals of the whole summer. Number 21. The screen doors, the netting, and the bug spray on hot summer nights. Let's be honest about something, because this channel doesn't pretend the past was perfect. A summer night in an open field, near the woods or the water, meant one thing for certain. The mosquitoes were coming, and they came in clouds. So you came prepared, the way families did back then. There was the can of bug spray that got passed hand to hand around the car, that particular sharp smell that meant summer just as much as the popcorn did. Some folks rigged netting over a cracked window so they could get air without getting eaten alive. Others burned a coil that smoldered on the dashboard, sending up a thin curl of smoke. And still the bites came, and you scratched them all the way home, and for 3 days after. But here's the strange thing about memory. Nobody remembers the mosquitoes as a reason they stopped going. They remember them the way you remember a little brother who wouldn't leave you alone, an annoyance so woven into the good times that you almost miss it now. The bites were the price of the stars. The bug spray was part of the smell of the whole evening. It wasn't comfortable, not always. You were hot, you were itchy, the back of your legs stuck to the seat, and you wouldn't trade a single one of those nights for all the air conditioning in the world. Some things you only understand were paradise after you've left the garden, mosquitoes and all. Number 20. Honking the horn, along with the whole crowd. This is one of the purest things we've lost, and it's almost impossible to explain to anyone who wasn't there. At the drive-in, when something big happened up on that screen, the hero landed the punch, the villain got what was coming, the young couple finally kissed. You didn't clap. You couldn't. Everybody was sealed up in their own cars. So instead, a horn would honk, then another, then a whole field of them. A great blaring chorus, rolling across the lot, headlights flashing on and off in the dark. Think about what that was. Hundreds of families, strangers to each other, each one in their own little steel room, and yet all of you were watching the same picture, feeling the same thing at the same moment, and you found a way to say so together. The horns were how a field full of separate cars became one crowd. Kids loved it most of all. You'd lean over your father's lap and lay on that horn until he swatted your hand away laughing. And for one wild minute, the whole drive-in sounded like a wedding, like a parade, like a stadium. A joy so big, it needed noise to hold it. You don't get that at home on the couch. That's the thing television could never give back. It could give you the movie, it could give you the comfort, but it could never give you 500 other families honking in the dark because their hearts all lifted at the very same second. That sound was the crowd remembering it was a crowd, and when the drive-ins closed, that sound went quiet for good. Number 19. Getting there early to claim the perfect spot. The movie started at dark, but your family left the house in broad daylight, and there was a reason for it. The best spots went fast, dead center, a few rows back, far enough that the screen filled your whole windshield, but not so far that the picture went small. Everybody had their own theory about the perfect row, and everybody wanted to get there first. So you came early, and the early part became its own event. The sky was still light. The movie was still an hour off, maybe more. And that hour was pure gold. The kids ran loose. Dads talked to the car parked next to them, comparing notes on the drive over. Moms spread out the blankets, sorted the snacks, got the little ones settled. The whole lot hummed with families setting up for the night, like it was a tailgate under the open sky. There was no rushing it. That was the point. You had bought yourself a whole evening, not just a movie, and the waiting was folded right into the fun. The light going gold, then pink, then blue. The first stars coming out, that slow, delicious sense of a night just getting started, with nowhere else in the world you had to be. Somewhere we lost the art of getting there early on purpose, of letting the waiting be part of the joy, instead of something to skip. Now everything is timed to the minute. Arrive as the lights go down. No room left for the golden hour before. But you remember it. That hour when the sky was still light and the whole beautiful night was still ahead of you. Every bit of it unspent. Number 18. The dancing snacks and the countdown clock at intermission. If you went to the drive-in, you know exactly what's coming, and you might already be smiling. Up on that giant screen, between the pictures, came the little cartoon. A hot dog, a soda cup, a box of popcorn, all of them with arms and legs, dancing across the screen, marching happily toward a snack bar. And that song, "Let's All Go to the Lobby." You can hear it right now, can't you? You've been able to hear it for 50 years. It was an advertisement, plain and simple. A gentle nudge to get up and go spend a little money before the second feature. But it never felt like a commercial. It felt like a friend. Those wobbly little dancing snacks were so cheerful, so silly, so perfectly of their time, that a couple of generations of American kids grew up thinking of them as old pals. And then came the clock. The screen would show the minutes ticking down. 10 minutes, 9, 8, until the next movie began. That countdown was the starting gun for the whole intermission. The second it appeared, car doors flew open all across the lot, and a river of people headed for the snack bar and the restrooms, everybody moving at once, kids running ahead, the whole field suddenly alive with motion in the dark. You don't see the dancing snacks anymore. except in somebody's fond memory or a scratchy old clip. But that little song outlived the theaters that played it. It's one of the last living echoes of the drive-in, humming around in the back of your mind after all these years. Some jingles you forget by the drive home. That one you'll carry to the end. Now let's pull back from the countdown for a moment, because to understand what we lost, you have to understand how big this thing once was. There was a time, and if you're old enough, you lived in it, when the drive-in wasn't a novelty or a memory. It was everywhere. By some accounts, at the peak, there were several thousand of them, scattered across the country, from big city outskirts to little towns in the middle of nowhere. Old-timers remember when nearly every community of any size had one glowing out on the edge of it. That great screen lit up against the night. And it was the summer program for the American family. Money was tight for a lot of folks, and here was a whole evening out where the whole carload got in for one price. It was where you took the kids when the house got too hot to sleep in anyway. It was where teenagers begged to go on a Friday night, and where more than a few first dates, first kisses, and first heartbreaks happened in the back row. The drive-in was sacred ground for young love, and every parent in America knew it, and worried about it, and let them go anyway. It stitched a town together. On a summer night, the same field might hold the banker's family and the farmhand's family, 2 rows apart, watching the same picture under the same stars. It was democratic in a way almost nothing is anymore. Everybody welcome, everybody equal once the lights went down. Hold that picture in your mind, thousands of them, glowing across the country, packed with families on a warm night. Because the rest of this list is about everything that lived inside those nights. And in a little while, we'll talk about how nearly all of it went dark. Number 17. The long walk to the glowing snack bar in the middle of the lot. When that countdown clock appeared, you were up and out of the car, and the walk began. The snack bar sat right in the middle of the lot, usually. A low building lit up bright as a lighthouse in all that darkness, and you walked toward it across the gravel, with a crowd of other shadowy figures, all headed the same way. That walk was an adventure when you were small. The ground crunched under your feet. Cars loomed on either side, some with families still inside, faces lit blue by the screen. You could smell the snack bar before you could read it. Hot butter and grilled onions and sugar, getting stronger with every step. And your father's hand was there in the dark, because it was easy for a small kid to get turned around out there among 1,000 identical cars. Inside, the light was almost blinding after all that dark, and the line was long, and the floor was sticky, and it was wonderful. Steam rising off the grill, the popcorn machine going, big kids working the counter, and the hard, delicious business of deciding how to spend the dollar your father had pressed into your hand. Then the walk back, and this was the tricky part, carrying a cardboard tray loaded with drinks and popcorn across that dark, uneven lot, trying to find your own car among the hundreds. You navigated by instinct, by the shape of the fender, by your mother's arm waving out the window. That walk is gone now, along with the little lit-up building at the center of it all. But if you ever made it, you can still feel the gravel under your feet and smell the butter on the night air. Number 16. Buttered popcorn served in a paper bucket. Some of the best popcorn of your entire life was eaten in a car, in the dark, at a drive-in. You know this. There was something about it. Maybe the machine that ran all night long. Maybe the real butter, or whatever they called butter, poured on hot and soaking down through the whole bucket. It came in a paper tub, and the good ones were heavy and warm in your hands and greasy at the bottom by the end. You'd dig down through it, passing it around the car, and the butter would get on the steering wheel and the door handle, and your father would grumble, and nobody would really care. The bottom of the bucket, where all the butter and salt had settled, that was the prize, and there was always a friendly little war over who got it. It tasted better there than it did anywhere else, and part of the reason was everything around it. The warm night, the movie starting, the whole family close together in the dark. Food always tastes like the moment you're eating it, and that moment was about as good as a summer got. The drive-ins took that popcorn with them when they went. Oh, you can buy popcorn anywhere now, but not that popcorn, not in that bucket, not in that car, not on that night, not with those people, some of whom aren't at the table anymore. The recipe was never really the secret. The secret was who you were sitting with when you ate it. Number 15. Hot dogs and ice-cold pop from the snack bar counter. And it wasn't just popcorn under those bright lights. The snack bar was a small wonderland of everything a kid wanted, and rarely got. Hot dogs turning on the rollers, split and steaming, waiting for a squeeze of mustard. Ice-cold bottles of pop, pulled, dripping from the cooler. So cold, they almost hurt your teeth. Candy in boxes, lined up in a glass case. Maybe a soft pretzel, maybe a paper boat of French fries, maybe an ice cream bar, going soft in the warm night before you could finish it. For a lot of families, this was the treat of the whole week. You didn't eat out much, not really. And here was a counter full of things you never got at home. So you chose carefully, and you savored it, and a single hot dog eaten in the front seat during a summer movie became a genuine event, worth remembering 50 years on. The pop is what a lot of folks recall most. Bottled, freezing cold, sweating in your hand, shared around the car, because one bottle went further than you'd think, when everybody just wanted a sip. On a hot night, that first cold swallow was pure heaven. That snack bar counter, with its rollers and its coolers, and its glass case of candy, closed up when the theaters did. And a certain kind of simple, once-a-week treat, the kind you looked forward to all week, and remembered all your life, closed up right along with it. It didn't take much to make a kid happy back then. A cold bottle of pop and a warm night were just about enough. Number 14. The clock on the screen counting down the break between features. We talked about the little dancing snacks, but the countdown clock deserves its own moment, because it was the heartbeat of the whole intermission. Right there on the giant screen, plain white numbers on a black field, the minutes ticking down until the second movie began. 10, 9, 8, and the whole drive-in ran on it. There was a real rhythm to those minutes, and everybody knew the steps. The moment the clock appeared, you had a job to do, and only so long to do it. Get to the restroom. Get to the snack bar and back. Refill the drinks, settle a fussy baby, let the kids burn off one last wild lap around the car. It was a small window of busy, happy chaos, and that clock up on the screen was the referee keeping time over all of it. And there was a little thrill of urgency to it, especially for a kid. You'd watch those numbers dropping while you stood in the snack bar line, doing the math, wondering if you'd make it back before the picture started. 3 minutes. 2. You'd hustle back across the gravel with your popcorn, slide into the car, just as the last number vanished, and the screen went bright again. You made it. You always made it. That clock organized a field full of hundreds of families without a single word spoken. Everybody moving to the same countdown, in the dark, under the stars. And when the drive-ins closed, that gentle white clock stopped ticking, and one more small piece of shared time went with it. Number 13. The cheapest night out the whole family could afford. Let's say it plainly, because it mattered more than almost anything else on this list. For a great many American families, the drive-in was the one night out they could actually afford, and that fact shaped everything about what those nights meant. Times were tighter than a lot of people remember now. A restaurant dinner was rare. An indoor movie for a family of 5 or 6 added up fast. But the drive-in charged by the car, and if you brought your own popcorn from home, a whole family got a whole evening of entertainment for pocket change. That wasn't a small thing. That was the difference between a family that got a night out and a family that never did. And here's the beautiful part. The kids never knew it was the cheap option. To them, it was the best night of the week. The stars, the movie, the snacks, the freedom of it. Money was the reason you were there. But love was what they remembered. Your parents stretched a thin dollar into a memory that lasted their kids a lifetime. And the kids never felt the thinness of the dollar at all. They only felt the bigness of the night. That's what a good parent did back then, and did without ever mentioning it. They took what little they had and turned it into magic, out in a dark field, under an open sky. The drive-in let families that had almost nothing give their children just about everything, for one night, for the price of a single car. Number 12. The playground down front, where kids ran wild before the movie. Here's something that'll surprise the younger folks, but you remember it clear as day. Right down at the front, In the dead space between the first row of cars and the bottom of that giant screen, a lot of drive-ins put a playground. Swings, a slide, a merry-go-round, a set of monkey bars, sitting right there in the shadow of the biggest movie screen in the county. And before the movie started, while the sky was still going dark, that playground belonged to every kid in the place. Your parents would let you out of the car the minute you arrived, and you'd run down front and join a swarm of children you'd never met, all of you playing hard in that last hour of daylight, while the grown-ups set up the cars behind you. Strangers at the start of the night, best friends by the time the movie called you back. It's almost hard to believe now, kids running loose in the dark, out of arm's reach, while parents sat back and let them. But that was the trust of the time. The whole lot was watching all the kids, the way a town used to watch all its children. Nobody worried the way we've learned to worry since. When the picture finally started, some worn-out little one had always fallen asleep down there and had to be carried back to the car. And that playground, right under the screen, emptied out as the light left the sky. Those swings are long gone, rusted and hauled off with everything else. But for one golden hour, at the foot of the biggest screen you'd ever seen, being a kid was about as free as it ever got. Now let's pull back one more time, because we've reached the hard part of the story, the part where all of this began to slip away. It didn't happen all at once, and that's what makes it so easy to miss. There was no single night the drive-in died. Instead, a few things crept in, quietly, over a handful of years. First came color television, right there in the living room. Why load the whole family into a hot car and drive across town when a picture, in color, was glowing in your own front room for free? Then came the videotape machine, and that was a heavier blow. Now you could watch nearly any movie you wanted, any night you wanted, without leaving the couch. The convenience was undeniable. Even the folks who loved the drive-in found themselves staying home more often than they meant to. And then came the thing that finished it, the land. Those drive-ins sat on big, wide fields, and as towns grew outward, that ground got valuable. Too valuable, in the cold arithmetic of it, to leave sitting under a movie screen a few hours a night, half the year. A shopping center could go there. Houses could go there. A parcel that made a little money as a drive-in could make a fortune as something else. Nobody was the villain, exactly. That's the ache of it. The families chose the comfort of home, one reasonable choice at a time. The owners took the fair price for their land, one sale at a time. And screen by screen, field by field, the drive-ins went dark. Not murdered, just quietly outvoted by the modern world. Number 11. The double feature. 2 whole movies for one price. And here's part of what that world let go of. When you went to the drive-in, you didn't get 1 movie, you got 2. The double feature was the standard, not the exception. 2 full pictures, back to back, for that single price per car. You came for the evening, the whole evening, and they gave you your money's worth and then some. There was a real generosity built into that. The first feature might be the big one, the one on the marquee that got you in the gate. The second was often something lighter, or stranger, or older, a picture you'd never have chosen on purpose and ended up loving anyway. You got a bonus, a surprise, a whole extra story thrown in for free, just for staying. And staying was the whole point. By the time that second feature rolled around, it was properly late. The little ones were asleep in the back. The teenagers had gone quiet. And there was something wonderful about being out that late as a family, deep into a summer night, watching a second movie you hadn't even planned on, in no hurry at all to go home. 2 movies for one price feels almost impossible now, in a world that charges you for every single thing separately and counts every minute. The double feature came from a more generous time, a time that assumed if you were going to give someone an evening, you might as well give them the whole thing. You didn't go to the drive-in to see a movie. You went to spend a whole night, and they made sure you got one. Number 10. The smell of popcorn, warm earth, and a summer night all mixed together. Close your eyes for this one, because it lives in your nose before it lives in your mind. There was a smell to the drive-in, and it was like nowhere else on earth. Hot buttered popcorn drifting from the snack bar. The warm dust and dry earth of the lot, kicked up by 100 tires and settling in the evening air. Cut grass from the field beyond the fence. bug spray, and exhaust, and somewhere the sweetness of somebody's cigarette. And under all of it, the particular green, growing smell of a summer night in America. Smell is the sense that reaches deepest into memory. The scientists tell us it wires straight to the oldest part of the brain, the part that holds our very first feelings. And that's why, for so many of us, a single whiff of buttered popcorn on a warm evening can drop us straight back into the back seat of a car we haven't ridden in for 50 years, next to people we'd give anything to sit beside again. You couldn't buy that smell. It only happened when all of it came together. The food, the earth, the night, the crowd. It was the smell of everybody being out together after dark, of summer at its fullest, of a night with nothing to do but be there. That smell is gone now, because the place that made it is gone. But your nose still remembers. It's waiting for you, that scent, in the back of your memory. Warm popcorn and warm earth, and a summer that never really ended, no matter what the calendar says. Number 9. Going in your pajamas, slippers and all, without a care in the world. Here's one that goes straight to the heart. You didn't dress up for the drive-in, you dressed down. In fact, half the kids in that lot came in their pajamas, bathed, brushed, ready for bed, and loaded straight into the car in their nightclothes and slippers. Think about what that meant, and why it was so wonderful. The whole plan assumed you'd fall asleep. Your parents knew you wouldn't make it through both features, and they built the whole night around that. Come in your pajamas, watch until your eyes got heavy, and drift off somewhere in the second movie, so they could carry you straight from the car to your bed without ever really waking you. And there is almost no feeling in childhood safer than that one. Warm from your bath, soft in your pajamas, tucked under a blanket in the back seat, the movie glowing far away, the murmur of your parents up front, the whole night wrapped around you like a second blanket. So sleep, because you didn't want the night to end. And you lost that fight, every time, in the best possible way. Nobody dresses their kids in pajamas to go out anymore. The whole idea of it, of an evening out that was designed for you to fall asleep in, belongs to that gentler, slower world. You were allowed to be a child there, all the way. Sleepy, safe, in your pajamas, under the stars, with nothing in the world to worry about. Number 8. The blanket and pillow made up in the back seat. This one goes hand in hand with the last, and it's just as tender. Before you ever left home, somebody, your mother, usually, made up the back seat like a little bed. A blanket spread across the seat. A pillow, sometimes two, from the beds at home. Maybe a favorite stuffed animal smuggled along for the ride. The back seat of that car became a nest, prepared with care, before a single foot left the driveway. She knew, you see. She knew exactly how the night would go. She knew you'd start out sitting up, wide-eyed and excited, and she knew that somewhere in the second feature, you'd fold down into that blanket and be gone. So she got the bed ready ahead of time, the way she got everything ready, thinking 3 steps ahead about your comfort, while you thought only about the movie. And it worked every time. The blanket smelled like home, like your own bed. The pillow was your own pillow. And when sleep finally came for you out there under the stars, you went down soft and warm, surrounded by the familiar smells of home, in the middle of a grand adventure, half in the wide world, half tucked safe in your own bed. There's no feeling quite like it. That made-up back seat is a small thing, and it says everything. Somebody thought ahead about exactly how you'd feel at the end of the night, and made it soft for you before you even knew you'd need it. That's love, quietly getting the bed ready before the movie even starts. Number 7. The metal speaker you hung on your car window. Here it is, the one I told you to watch for. The single most iconic thing about the whole drive-in. The object your hands remember before your mind even catches up. The speaker. A heavy gray metal box on a coiled cord, hanging on a post at the edge of your parking spot. And the first thing you did, every single time, was roll down your window, lift that speaker off its hook, and hang it on the glass. That was the ritual that started the night. That little clunk of metal on the window frame, the night could begin now. The sound that came out of it was terrible, if we're honest. Tinny, crackly, a little muffled, sometimes buzzing. But you didn't care, because you didn't know any different, and because that scratchy little voice was the sound of the movie itself. You leaned toward it to catch the quiet parts. You turned the volume knob on its face. On a cold night, you cracked the window just enough for the cord, and let a little chill in for the sake of the sound. And oh, the trouble those speakers caused, in the best way. Every drive-in in America lost a fortune to folks who forgot to hang the speaker back up when the movie ended, who started the car, pulled away, and tore the whole thing clean off the post with a bang, dragging it halfway down the row. It happened constantly. There were signs begging you to remember. And still, on every summer night, somewhere in that lot, came the unmistakable crunch of a forgotten speaker, meeting the end of the night. When the car radio came along, these speakers started to disappear, and the theaters barely mourned them. But you might. Because that cold metal box was the drive-in. More than the screen, more than the snack bar. It was the thing you held in your hands. You can still feel its weight. That cold, heavy little box, and the clunk of it on the window, and the whole magic night it promised the moment you hung it up. Number 6. The children asleep in the back seat, before the second movie ended. This is the tender one. The one I told you to wait for, back at the very start. Because for every parent who ever took a family to the drive-in, this was the picture they carried home in their heart. You'd glance in the rear-view mirror, somewhere in the middle of that second feature, and there they were, the kids, asleep, piled together in the back seat under the blanket, popcorn still in the tub, mouths open, dead to the world. And something happened to a parent in that moment. The movie kept playing, but you weren't really watching it anymore. You were watching them in the mirror, your children, safe and warm and utterly at peace, worn out from a night of pure joy. The whole reason you'd come, the whole reason you'd scraped together the few dollars and packed the popcorn and made up the back seat, was sleeping right there behind you, and it was worth every bit of it. That was the quiet payoff of the whole evening, not the movie. This, the soft weight of a sleeping child carried from the car to the bed, the little arms around your neck, the not quite waking as you tucked them in. You'd done it. You'd given them a perfect night, and they were too young to know it, and someday, long after you were gone, they'd remember it as one of the best feelings they ever had. If you were one of those children, know this now, all these years later, somebody watched you sleep in that back seat and felt their whole heart go quiet with love. That was your mother, that was your father, and that is the memory they took with them. Number 5. The Back Row and Young Love Under the Stars. Now, every parent knew about this one, and every teenager was counting on it. The back row. That's where the young couples parked, as far from the snack bar lights as they could get, and everybody understood exactly what the back row was for. It was the most famous lover's lane in America, and it came with a movie playing. For a whole generation, the drive-in was where young love happened. It was where a boy worked up the nerve to reach for a girl's hand in the dark. It was a first date that didn't cost much, and didn't require a word, because the movie did the talking. It was a first kiss, under a sky full of real stars, with a picture flickering on a giant screen, and the radio playing soft, and the whole warm night wrapped around two nervous kids, figuring out their hearts. Not much of the movie got watched in the back row, and everybody knew it, and that was part of the gentle comedy of the whole thing. Parents joked about it, preachers worried about it, and still every Friday night, the back row filled up with sweethearts, because there was no better place in town to be young, and in love, and alone together, out under the open sky. A great many marriages, maybe your own, got their real start in the back row of a drive-in, on a summer night, with the stars out and a movie neither one of you could remember afterward. That's where it began. The drive-in didn't just show love stories, it made them, and a whole generation's sweetest beginnings happened in the back row, under those very same stars. Number 4. The whole family in one car, from the baby to grandpa. Here's what may be the most beautiful thing of all, and it's so simple you might have overlooked it. At the drive-in, the whole family went, all of it, in one car, the baby on somebody's lap, the little kids in their pajamas, the teenagers, sullen or delighted depending on the night, mom and dad up front, and grandma and grandpa squeezed in too, because there was always room for one more, and nobody wanted to be left out of drive-in night. 3 generations, sometimes 4, sealed together in one automobile under the stars. Where else did that happen? At home, Everybody scattered to their own corners. But in that car, for one whole evening, the entire family was pressed together in a single small space, sharing one screen, one bucket of popcorn, one summer night. The baby fussed and got passed around. Grandpa fell asleep before the kids did and snored through the good part. Everybody was there. Everybody was together. And time, we know now, was quietly doing its work even then. Some of the people in that car were near the end of their long lives, and some were just beginning theirs. And for one night, they were all in the same back seat, under the same stars, and nobody was thinking about any of that. They were just watching the movie, together. If you could go back to any single night, a lot of us would choose one of those. The whole family in one car, every last one of them still here, still close enough to touch. Everybody you loved, in one car, under one sky. You didn't know it was heaven. You just thought it was Friday. Number 3. The long line of cars leaving, headlights glowing in the dark. And then, at last, it ended. The second feature faded out. The screen went white and then black, and the whole drive-in stirred to life in the dark. Engines turning over, one after another, all across the lot. Headlights blinking on, hundreds of them, and that slow, patient river of cars winding toward the single exit. There was no rushing it, and nobody really tried. You inched forward in the line, your sleeping children in the back, your window down to the cool night air, and you watched the taillights ahead of you glowing red all the way to the road. It was the gentlest kind of traffic jam. Everybody tired, everybody happy, everybody heading home from the same good night. Sometimes a horn tapped a friendly goodbye. Sometimes a hand waved from a passing window. And there was a particular feeling in that slow line out, a feeling you may have forgotten you knew, the bittersweetness of a wonderful night ending. The kids asleep, the movie over, the long drive home ahead, and already, somehow, a little ache starting, the wish that the night could have lasted longer, that you could stay in that field under those stars just a while more. That river of headlights, winding out of a dark field toward home, is a sight you'll never see again. The fields are parking lots and shopping centers now, but you drove out of one, once, on a summer night, with everyone you loved asleep in the car behind you. Every good night has to end, but some of them keep glowing, red taillights in the dark, for the rest of your life. Number 2. The real stars shining above the screen. Lean back and remember this one, because it's easy to forget it was even there. Above that giant screen, above the whole lit-up world of the drive-in, there was the sky, the real sky. And out there, past the edge of town where the drive-ins always sat, that sky was full of stars. You'd look up between the movies, or during the slow parts, and there they were, more of them than you ever saw from your own front porch in town. The whole glittering spread of them, wheeling slow over the field, with maybe a warm summer moon low on the horizon, and the flicker of the movie glowing below. You watched a story on the screen, and above it, the oldest story of all, was playing too, silent and enormous, the same stars your grandparents had watched, and their grandparents before them. There was a bigness to those nights that came from that open sky. You were small, in your car, in a field, under all those stars, and somehow that made you feel held, rather than lost. The movie was make-believe, the stars were real, and you got both at once, layered one over the other, on a warm night with the people you loved. We can't see those stars anymore. Most of us. The lights of the grown-up towns have washed them out. But out in that dark field, with the screen glowing and the crickets going, you could still look up and see the whole universe hanging over the second feature. You didn't just watch a movie under the stars, you watched it with the stars watching back. And that brings us to number 1. Number 1. The giant screen lighting up against the darkening sky. There it is. Of everything we've remembered tonight, this is the image that holds it all, the one that comes back first when you close your eyes and think of the drive-in, dusk. The sky going from gold to pink to deep blue. The field slowly filling with cars, row after row of them, settling onto the ramps. And then, as the last light drains out of the sky, that enormous screen flickers, glows, and comes to life. A wall of light against the falling dark. The biggest, brightest thing for miles. Everything stopped for that moment. The kids quit running. The car doors thumped shut. A whole field of families went quiet and turned their faces up toward that great glowing rectangle, and you could feel the hush roll across the lot like a wave. The night was here. It was starting. Everything you'd waited for through the long golden hour was finally, wonderfully beginning. And it was beautiful, truly beautiful, in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who never saw it. That much light, out in the middle of the dark countryside, with hundreds of cars pointed toward it, and the first stars pricking out overhead. It was a cathedral, with no walls. It was the whole town gathered in the dark to look at the same light. It was the closest thing a lot of us ever had to a shared dream, all of us seeing the same thing at the same time under the open sky. That's the image on the empty lots now. If you know where the old drive-in used to be, and a lot of you do, you can still drive past the spot. And maybe there's a shopping center there now, or houses, or just a field going back to weeds with a bit of old fence. But if you were there, back then, you can still see it. The screen, lighting up against the darkening sky, the most magic moment of the whole American summer. It lit up a million summer nights, and for those of us who saw it, it never really goes dark. Let's take one last look back before we go, at the whole of it. The drive-in didn't close because it was bad. That's the thing to hold on to. It closed because the world quietly changed around it, one reasonable choice at a time. We brought the screen indoors, into the living room, in color, for free. We learned to watch whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted, without leaving the couch. And the wide-open fields where the drive-in stood became worth more as something else. Nobody killed the drive-in. We just slowly stopped needing it, and the land stopped being able to afford to stay. But here's what we didn't understand we were trading away. It was never really about the movie. You could always see a movie somewhere. What we lost was a way of being together. The whole family in one car. The whole town in one field. Everybody out in the warm dark under the real stars, looking at the same light. We traded the open sky for the closed room. We traded the crowd for the couch. And most of us didn't even notice it was gone until it already was. That's the ache of it, and the gift of it too. Because you were there. You saw the screen light up. You smelled the popcorn and heard the horns and slept in the back seat under a made-up blanket. That happened. It was real, and no shopping center built on top of it can take that night away from you. So let me ask you something, and I hope you'll tell me. What's your drive-in memory? Was it the speaker on the window, or the pajamas, or the back row you're maybe still a little shy to admit to? Did your family have a regular spot? A favorite drive-in out on some particular road? Do you remember the last movie you ever saw at one, before it closed for good? Tell me down in the comments. Tell me what you saw up on that screen, and who was in the car with you. Some of the people reading along tonight were in that same field as you, all those years ago. And this is where we find each other again, and remember together. And if tonight brought that old feeling back, there's one more night I'd like to take you on. Before the drive-ins, before the malls, America shopped in grand old stores that felt like palaces, with elevator operators, and lunch counters, and window displays that stopped you on the sidewalk. Go watch those 5 forgotten department stores from the 1960s that America left behind. It's the perfect place to go next, and I'll be there waiting for you, ready to remember it all together. Good night, and thank you for remembering with me.